And thanks to the organizers, I'm honored and privileged to be presenting the Borker Memorial Lecture. And thank you for that caution of getting people to switch off their cell phones. I was a journalist once, and he used to begin his meetings by saying, there's a simple rule. This was Robert Fisk at a meeting saying, anyone whose cell phone rings while I'm speaking will be sold immediately into slavery. And on cue, a phone rang. And it was his own. Let me make sure that I do not suffer that humiliation. I suspect that, like several speakers in this series of lectures before me, I begin by whining about how alarming the word vision is. I certainly am scared of words like vision. For that matter, I'm very scared of words like dignitary, Suras. But, okay. However, the reason why it scares me, I don't know, it sounds very lofty and big, and also that I can't begin to remember how many people who have had visions have ceased to be my friends. And my own crude personal reaction to anyone sharing issues of vision with me is to suggest a visit to the ophthalmologist or shrink, who are competent to deal with that. But since Suhas has pinned me down to it, and I just have to now outline something along those lines, maybe the word I will use, because 2047 is not all that far off. Maybe the word I use is hope or vision interchangeably, both. And I think what we can hope to see or envision for 2047, it could depend a lot on what we do in 2017. So, in order to have a vision or hope of what should be, we need to have a completely unromanticized view of what is. A completely unromanticized view of where we are and what is. Then you can think about what should be and how we go about that. So, well, 2047 and 2017, that's one set of dates. I'll take you back to an extremely important date for someone like me, and I concur with their vision that led to 1947. Okay. So I think that the vision that led to 1947 remains only partially realized, not fulfilled, and extremely important. One of the things I do as a journalist, and have done for nearly 20 years now, is that I have been recording interviews with the last living freedom fighters. It is such a moving experience. It is such a... 2 weeks ago, I was at the village of Nana Patil, the first man to declare a provisional underground government under the British in Maharashtra. Nana Patil, 150 villages swore allegiance in Sangli and Satara to the Patri Sarkar. They used to nail their notices to the trees and the boards. Nana Patil was the leader of that uprising, and I went there for a function to commemorate his anniversary. And when I was there, I realized, apart from the mass of young students who crowded the hall, that there was 6-7 people, very aged gentlemen, sitting separately in one corner, and they turned out to be freedom fighters in their 90s who are still alive. Mahadev Mane, a whole heap of them. You know who these people were? There was also Bapu Lad a few villages away. All of them were part of what was known as the Tufan Sena, the whirlwind army that believed in direct action and took on British imperialism head on in an uprising that saw the farmers of Satara and Sangli and the western Maharashtra attack the trains. It's very hard looking at Bapu Lad today, the 95-year-old Bapu Lad, to imagine that he mounted a horse and stopped the Bombay Karad Express and looted the payroll meant for the British Sarkari officials, and this money was distributed to the starving peasantry and farm laborers in a period of drought and famine. In fact, years ago, when I met Bapu Lad, I received a prize in his name and asked him about the attack on the train. He said, हमने कुछ लूट नहीं किया, जो अंग्रेजी ने लूट के गया हमने वापस लाया. Now, I interviewed Salihan in Odisha, the Adivasi woman who with 40 other women took on the troops in what came to be known as the Salihan uprising in Noapada. Okay. I have interviewed some of the oldest Babas, the Gaddari Babas in the early 90s who were still alive at the time. The last of them. There was something common to all of them, and all of them had a vision. Maybe their vision was different from one another also, but they had certain common things to their vision. What did you fight for? Of course, everyone said we fought to expel the alien ruler. You pressed the question, what did you fight for really? They fought for a just society. They fought for a nation based on justice. This is common across the freedom fighters. They fought for a just society. They fought for a good society. And yeah, they had a vision. And it was a vision very strongly tied to justice. And it is so important, as Sukumar mentioned, that your preamble puts justice so clearly at the top of what we have to do. So what do we have now? As I said, we need to have an unromanticized view of what we have today if we want to know what should be. At this moment we are celebrating, well, one is we have levels of inequality that are criminal. We have generated levels of criminality, of inequality that are criminal. And we are now celebrating the process by which that was achieved. 25 years. We are now celebrating the 25 years by which that process was achieved. And I'm reading all sorts of romantic, fanciful articles, including some which have discovered unknown virtues in my old, fellow Telugu P.V. Narasimha Rao, in whom all sorts of wonderful qualities have been discovered that I never knew he had, he never knew he had. But it happens when it did happen soon after he came to power. It did happen. And I was berated once by a leader from Maharashtra who was upset about being left out of the cabinet and wanted to get back into it. I had written what I honestly thought of P.V. Narasimha Rao. You don't want to know what I thought of P.V. Narasimha Rao. And I was on the steps of Parliament. I was berated by this big politician from Maharashtra who said, you have been so abusive towards Narsingh Rao ji. They couldn't even pronounce his name and say Narasimha Rao. Okay? Narsingh Rao, it sounded like some nursing home. Narsingh Rao ji is such a wonderful, knowledgeable person. He speaks 9 languages. He is a great linguist and a unique intellectual. On that I agreed. He was a great, as I said to him, that I agree with you. He is a great linguist and a unique intellectual. Particularly unique because he's the only man I know who had nothing to say in 9 languages. The levels of inequality we generated mean today, if you look, there are 4-5 sets of data that you can look at. You can look at the NSS decile-wise wealth holding in India, total household wealth. You can look at the Forbes billionaires data. You can look at the Oxfam's analysis of Credit Suisse's World Wealth Report. You can look at Credit Suisse's World Wealth Report itself, and to save you the time, India figures on page 149. So you can look at the data given there. What does it show you that we have succeeded in doing? Between year 2000 and 2015, in those 16 years, India achieved this distinction of having the fastest growth of inequality of any major nation. There are nations more unequal than us, far more unequal than us, like South Africa. But the rate at which it grew, the rate at which that growth took place of inequality in the large nations. Let me tell you, for instance, the United States, 1% of the top 1% own 53% of their wealth. Sorry, 37% of their wealth. In India, that's 53%. In 2014, it was 49%. In 2015, it was 53%. The rate at which it grew was stunning over that 16 years, if you look. And we've also built new inequalities reinforcing the old. There are many old inequalities like caste and untouchability and stuff, and we have built on those, we have deepened those, we have generated them further. I want to tell you that, because we are so cut off from our own society, because our media cocoon us from they're suddenly taken unawares and really don't know what to do when something like Una happens. Una is not, what is Una? It was a spectacular breakdown of a process that has been on and on and on for a very long time. It wasn't a one-off incident. It wasn't that this atrocity took place here. It was a breakdown of a absolutely unsustainable process of exploitation, of inequality. And by the way, the untouchability I would like to emphasize, is not, as people try reducing it to, just a social evil. Untouchability is far more than a social evil. Untouchability is a highly sophisticated and effective strategy of ensuring ourselves a permanent and perpetual pool of cheap, demoralized labor. And that is what untouchability is about, beyond just being a social evil. Okay? It is a highly sophisticated strategy of ensuring a permanent and perpetual pool of cheap and demoralized labor. Of course, today, what do we have? We have Swachh Bharat. Yeah. Based on septic tanks. Do you know that this year, I'm so glad that the Magsaysay Prize honored, or rather, Bezawada Wilson honored the Magsaysay Prize. If you ask Wilson, he will tell you, as he spoke on April 13th, the day before Ambedkar's anniversary in Delhi at Jantar Mantar, he explained that in fact, of the 1,357 Safai Karamchari deaths that have occurred in the last several years, the vast majority have occurred in septic tanks. Okay? The vast, including last Last week, I was speaking at Hyderabad, 4 of them died in a manhole. But the vast majority of the Safai Karamcharis, look at this, the most shameful practice of any country on earth. Okay? But the vast majority died in septic tanks, and you are having this gigantic project called Swachh Bharat built on septic tanks, where it's a major part of your strategy. So this was Bezawada Wilson speaking at the Bhim Yatra, where Safai Karamcharis came from scores of districts across the country, and they went on a tour which saw them in teams, relay teams, crossing hundreds of districts in a country of 688 districts. They came to Delhi to find no media reception at all. They got covered by the media. You know why? Because the NIIT students of Srinagar were also sitting there, and the television had come to cover them, and then they also spoke. So that's how they got some coverage. I was making a calculation there. There are 2 versions of how many Safai Karamcharis, manual scavengers. It's an odd word to use, manual, for a profession and occupation that I think suspect is 80% run by women. But the manual scavengers are estimated to be 2 lakh by government and 3 lakh by Wilson and his group and his movement. And according to the government, it costs about 3 lakhs per scavenger to rehabilitate that person, take them out of an old profession, give them a new old occupation, and give them a new profession. It costs 3 lakhs. So let's take the high-end figure. 3 lakhs and each 3 lakhs. That's 9,000 crore. That's about what Vijay Mallya owes the banks. And he offered to, remember, he offered to return half. So we could have a PPP with him and, or a joint venture and eradicate half of the manual scavenging. Right, I mean, I don't see why people are so negative about the idea of all these PPPs. And, so you have in approaching 2017, a quarter of 1,000,000 human beings cleaning human excreta with their hands. What sort of nation are you? What sort of society are we? Here's my vision. I want an India willing to look in the mirror and see ourselves for the caste-ridden, discriminatory and unjust society we are. I want that, and I don't want to wait for 2047. I want it to be. You can't have, we have socialized ourselves not to see this going on around us. We can't have a vision of the future. You can't have vision if we cling willingly to myopia. It's not possible. The two are contradictory. After 70 years, Dalits, not just the manual scavengers, but 200 million of them, are still forbidden in most villages in this country from using the common graveyards, pathways, temples, tea shops, common grounds, common properties. Arbitrariness is the name of the game. And it's again a way of holding people down. I've just come to hate these words, social evil. That's a part of it. It's not the whole of it. Or you take, the arbitrariness is just deadly. In my innocence, about 20 years ago, when I was looking at the Kumher massacre in Rajasthan, Chunilal Jatar, a Dalit, one of the survivors of the massacre, kept telling me things which I thought were not possible. I said, Chunilalji, this is not the procedure. It couldn't have happened this way. Chunilalji, police could not have done that because that is not the police procedure. Chunilalji, the police could not have written that because it has to go into that other diary. He was very patient with my complete ignorance. after listening to me, sweetly said, Sainath ji, talk to me about law and justice and procedure. Sure. He said, all the learned judges of the Supreme Court do not have the power of my local Havaldar. The learned judges interpret the law. My Havaldar writes his own. And it's true. The learned judges interpret the law. That Havaldar makes up his own as he goes along.
Organizers.
On.
Sir, sorry, but there are 50 odd of us who are trying to see you. Move a bit.
There is.
I suggest you please. You can't help it.
Sorry, I don't see an inch of space before me here. Okay, you want? I don't mind to ask that if people say. Okay, we'll give it 2 minutes. Let those who are front up here can come on the dais. Veriness that Chunilal Jadhav spoke of in Kumbher. You can see today in the extension of the beef ban in Maharashtra. And you can look at its results, you can look at its consequences, which are just so devastating. What did they do? They wanted to shaft the Muslims. That's all they wanted, right? But then you've got a bunch of people so completely stupid that even what they want to achieve, they achieve far beyond it. Oh yeah, by extending the beef ban to bullocks and bulls and whatever, they did devastate a significant Muslim community in Maharashtra. They also finished all the other major communities in the agrarian sector. The cattle market prices in Maharashtra have fallen 60%. When you're an IAS probationer at Lal Bahadur Shastri Academy, one of the first things you're taught when you go out as a probationer to your district is, if cattle market prices fall 30%, you have a crisis. It's fallen 60%. Okay? It's fallen 60% because no one now can buy or sell. No one now can buy or sell, and people are terrified. So, by the way, who are the cattle market dealers? As you know, every 5-10 villages has a market. Many of the dealers are your other backward castes, OBCs. Many of the dealers. There are Muslim OBCs, there are Hindu OBCs. They are the dealers. Then, the Maratha farmer is devastated by that. In the drought in Marathwada, what happens? You can't feed your family, you can't get water for your family. How are you going to provide water for your half a dozen cows? How are you going to provide food for your half a dozen cows? So farmers watch their cows die. Okay? The Gau Rakshaks killed these cows. Farmers watched their cows, so the Maratha farmers took a beating. And of course, ultimately, as always, the Dalits took a complete beating. Because your Kolhapur chappal industry took the brunt of that without hides. When they tried bringing hides from Krompet in Chennai, just on the edge of Chennai, which is my hometown Chennai, those vans were set alight by activists of the Bajrang Dal, VHP, on the borders of Karnataka, Maharashtra, you know. And so you had the RSS active, the BJP passing laws, the VHP doing something else, the Bajrang Dal burning vans with hides. So the Kolhapur industry, so you had the Marathas, the Dalits, the Muslims, the OBCs, everybody suffering. And of course, the government saying, oh no, that's not BJP, that's Bajrang Dal, and that's, they're an independent organization. We didn't do anything. Actually, I want on this, as I've been at pains to clarify, because I've been accused of being otherwise, so I'm at pains to clarify that I do accept the BJP spokesperson's position that these are different organizations and that there are distinct differences between the BJP, VHP, Bajrang Dal. The BJP is the RSS on politics. The VHP is the BJP on steroids. Bajrang Dal is the VHP on crack. So, yeah, there are differences, but we'll leave that aside. It's interesting that now Togadia attacks the Prime Minister and all this stuff goes on. But I want to tell you something else about cows generally. None of these clowns meddling with that issue has any sense of how important cattle are in the rural economy, how central they are to so many sections of the rural economy. Okay? And I also want to tell you this, in the last 25 years, regardless of which government has been in power, whether it is the NDA or the UPA, livestock population of this country has been in decline. A. The worst decline has been of Deshi cows, 9%. Deshi breeds are seeing the heaviest decline. So I suppose we can, in this era of hyper-patriotism, we can refer to both governments as Deshi Drohis. Now, the inequalities, as I said, that keep growing, I'm looking for an India where the Dalits will have won by 47 what I believe to be the greatest battle for human dignity on earth today. And at first of the human rights, the right to be recognized as human, the destruction of untouchability, which is one part of the caste problem, but to be able to ascertain their rights and that are guaranteed to them under the Constitution, but rarely enforced. 25 years ago, before this great period started, there were no gated communities in India. Okay? Look at, I'm coming back to inequality. There were gated communities of the Desi variety, which is the caste layout of every village in this country, Indian apartheid, where Dalits are never part of the village, they are on the outskirts of the village. Usually on the southern outskirts, ask me why later. Because there are strong economic reasons for it. But to that we have now added the class of exclusion. 25 years ago, or if you look at 1991, Delhi, there's a generation sitting here that doesn't know that there were no steel gates fencing off all the major colonies of Delhi. There were no steel gates and private cops and private security for Chanakyapuri, Akepuram, Vasant Vihar and 100 other colonies. None of these gates. I lived in a servants' quarters in Vasant Vihar in the 1980s as well. I was a reporter, a journalist at the United News of India. Okay. Now, first you privatize public properties, shutting them off at 7 and harassing those who come with their cows and buffaloes, etc. You're in fact enclosing many public properties like the electricity, the transformer, the water supply, everything you're shutting. And now, that was by 1993 it began to happen. By 2003, there are gated communities in the Western sense all across India. 2013, there is a corporation called Gated Communities in India. And there is a website, you can go and look at it tonight, gatedcommunities.com, which says we are the fastest growing. We're very proud. We're always the fastest, best, shortest, fattest, fittest, whatever. India is the third great. With a population of 1.28 billion, you're going to be the third biggest everything. Anyway, the gated communities, you should read the notices, how they praise and glorify exclusion. They glorify exclusion. Now this is the class exclusion that you're adding to already existing caste exclusion. And they sit very well together, because you'll find that the gated communities exclusion has not in any way troubled the Varnashrama Dharma. It has not upset the caste exclusion. Both are sitting very happily together. Let me tell you, Aquaria granda, a complex grande. Oh, by the way, now The exotic names are Spanish. We are done with Portuguese and Italian. So Aquaria Grande is a complex that will have anywhere between 150 and 210 swimming pools. Every balcony has a swimming pool. You can go to the net and look at it. It's got clearance. It's not been built. All the builders are in a slump. And also there was resistance. But all over the country, these kind of structures are coming up. Pune has 2-3 buildings, 12 floors, swimming pool, every floor. They're called balcony pools. In a state boasting the greatest drought in 70 years, 100 years, all these were given permission and clearances. That kind of inequality. And who are the people building the swimming pools? Who are the people building Aquaria Grande? If you're a reporter like me, you go and interview not the builder but the construction laborer. They are the ones. The construction laborers at these various sites, कौन हो तुम? Sir, हम शेतकरी हैं sir, शेत मजदूर हैं sir. Shetkari and Shet Mazdoor in Marathi is farmer and farm labor. What are you doing here? Why are you not why are you not on your farm? खेत में पानी कहाँ है sir? Okay, they have abandoned their village because there is no water and come to the city to build our swimming pools. So there you are. If swimming pools, Maharashtra has added, by the way, something like between 20 and 21 golf courses in these 25 years. You know how much water that takes? More water than any other sport and more pesticides than any other sport. You have on the Mumbai-Pune highway hundreds of giant hoardings advertising luxury villas, and central to every one of them is the size and shape of the swimming pool. My favorite is one which on the Mumbai-Pune highway says luxury villas, swimming pool and attached forest reserve. In the state of Maharashtra, the Fort Tiger doesn't have an attached forest reserve. But the building don't have it. Water has always been special in India's inequalities, exclusiveness and exclusion from the days when we have denied Dalits access to the community well and the community tap. But now we are finding new ways, new inequalities to mount with the old. The Nashik grape crop earlier this year was devastated. Okay? That's why the Godavari begins in Nashik and Brahmagiri. It flows downstream all the way to Andhra, all the way to Andhra Pradesh, to coastal Andhra. Suddenly, some clown, and there's a lot of them in our cabinet, takes a decision and 1.3 TMC, 1.3 thousand million cubic feet of water is diverted to the Kumbh Mela, which they are promoting as their Kumbh Mela in Nashik. So what happens? The downstream effect is grape growing, by the way, requires 3 rotations of water. The ones top closest upstream got 2 rotations, meaning they got crop of very poor quality, their prices went. The ones below them lost their crop altogether. Please understand how fragile and interlinked rural distress is. Nashik is one division, Marathwada is another division. But you know what happened? The destruction of the grape crop in Nashik devastated thousands of poor homes in Marathwada because the agricultural laborers come from Marathwada, and in the Nashik grape fields they find 3 to 3.5 million labor days, man days as people call them, but working days. 3 million days of labor, out of which 2.5 million were destroyed. So by this simple decision up there, we exported the crisis all the way into the poorest homes of Marathwada, where the agricultural laborers come from. By the way, in Marathwada, you saw the new mentality of the India approaching 2017. How many editorials were written criticizing the High Court for its decision to penalize the Indian Premier League? People actually wrote editorials attacking the, and I speak as an absolute cricket fan and fanatic. Okay? Now, I don't think of IPL as cricket, by the way. But the attacking the High Court for its decision to say that you cannot hold these matches here when people are dying without water, no one ever mentioned that in Marathwada, where poor women were paying between 45 paisa to 1 rupee for a liter of water, 24 beer factories exist in Marathwada getting water at 4 paisa per liter. Beer and alcohol factories. I'm not counting the hundreds of bottling plants for water. I'm not talking about the mineral water mafia. I'm talking about alcohol factories, beer factories. 4 to 5 paisa is an improvement. In the 1980s, it was 1 paisa. Then somebody took them to court and a brilliant victory was won and they now pay 4 paisa to 5 paisa. The High Court imposed a cut of 50% in production phased over a period of time, which has gone now with the monsoon. These are the new inequalities. Look at what your constitution promised. Look at what your freedom struggle promised. Look at the kind of promises that we gave ourselves, the contract we made with the Indian people, with the Indian nation about inequality and equality and justice and fairness. I also want an India that does not lie to itself. That's also my vision and hope for 2047. I don't think we can achieve that by 2017. But maybe by 2047, something miraculous will happen. Look at yesterday's newspaper. A third commission discovers that Rohit Vemula is not a Dalit. Okay. The local authority, the Tahsildar, found that he was a Dalit. The ultimate authority of the district collector of Guntur, found him to be a Dalit. But a commission was nonetheless set up to find that he is not a Dalit. Okay. This is a nation that lies to itself. Maybe our vision should be of one that is able to look itself in the mirror and recognize ourselves for what we are and who we are, that with all our greatness, with all our beauty and brilliance also goes a fair degree of barbarism and cruelty, and an enormous degree of cruelty. You know, the way we lie to ourselves, why did they have three inquiries into whether he was a Dalit? Because in India, let me tell you, Maharashtra on farm suicides has had 13 committees. In India, you have as many committees as it takes until one of them gives the government the report it wants. Yeah? So until one of them says that, yeah, it happened with the farm suicides thing, and I'll tell you about that in a minute. But let me tell you, the experience, and Shivakumar has shared this experience, I think, more than once, when some of us, for our sins, were required to sit on the BPL expert committee. I love that committee, the BPL expert. I was on that, somebody somehow defined me as an expert. And so I sat there. The report that we produced, I wrote a dissent note, my only serious contribution to the commission. The reports began, paragraph 2.1, the report began by saying, our report is unlikely to be considered by government if we do not provide a cap to the number of poor. Before anything, we are providing a cap on the number of poor before we bloody counted them. Okay? The report actually says, 2.1. Unlikely to be considered, anyway, I think they made some changes later, but unlikely to be considered by the government if we do not. We had also received a letter from the ministry saying, it is fair that states can have their own estimates, but please keep the margin of difference at under 20%. Then, I wrote a dissenting note pointing out that the group's task is to produce a report that speaks the truth, not a truth made acceptable to government. Yeah. But anyway, I remember the scintillating discussion that took place, Shivakumar, on female-headed households. 17 of us or so passionately argued whether female-headed households should automatically be marked BPL. Now, there is no argument about that. Anyone knows that that is the obvious practice. But there was a huge argument Three of us arguing that it's an automatic process, that female-headed households will be marked BPL in the rural areas. I mean, generally, one of the gentlemen from the government argued, "Aisa kaisa? Fir kal main bhi," and he was from the NSSO Shivakumar, and he argued, "Aisa kaisa? Then tomorrow I can also declare my house to be a female-headed household and say my wife is in charge." I told him that I think that would be an excellent idea. Get to farm suicide numbers. By the way, usually the NCRB numbers are out on June 30th latest every year on farmers' suicide. For 19 years, we had one set of numbers, one kind of methodology, and one group counted of farmers. In the parliament questions, you can see the figure only refers to farmers, which is under the definition of the census, the main cultivator who has operated a piece of land for 180 days or more, which is 6 months. There's a reason for that. Otherwise, every corporate executive who goes to tend his grapes in Nashik on a Sunday becomes a farmer. So you have a certain qualification level, a limit, whatever placed on it. Right? You have that. And the farm suicide numbers, suddenly the entire game changed in 2014 data. Okay, suddenly. And the number of farmer suicides fell by more than half, even as the number of suicides in the agrarian sector went up. How did they do this? By changing the data heads. They created contract farmer as a category, which is tenant farmer. They created agricultural laborers as a separate category, and there are academics willing to go along with this and work the research backwards to say that what was there earlier also had these three categories in it. It is not true, and you can check that with parliamentary questions and answers of the ministers who say these are farmers. Nowhere was the word agricultural laborer used. So last year what did they do? They created these three categories knowing, and I know it because I know who brought the changes, knowing fully well that in India, tenant farmers have no record. Tenant farmers have no documents. Note, 95% of tenant farmers have, in fact, that's one of the most vulnerable sections to suicide. They don't get credit from the banks because they don't have a name on the patta. Okay? They don't get anything. So, when you create a category called tenant farmers, in 95% of the cases, they have no proof that the person was a tenant farmer, so that person now goes into the category called agricultural labor. You know what the data show last year? Far more agricultural laborers committed suicide than farmers in India. A claim that no labor union of agricultural workers has made, a claim nobody has ever made, but because it's full of thousands of tenant farmers who cannot be counted as farmers because you've created this category. Now this year, here is my information from there. Despite all these gains, the main farmer category has gone up 40%. Just the main farmer category. And they are stuck with it and don't know how the hell to handle it. And by the way, more and more states are declaring that India is the best place to be a farmer because 12 states and 6 union territories have declared zero farmer suicides. Nowhere in the world is that possible. 12 states and 6 union territories in the 2014 data. In 1997, there was not a single state that said zero. In 2014, there are states which had 15,000 suicides in the previous 10 years, which since 2011 have been declaring zero, like Chhattisgarh. States which have had an average of 850 a year for a decade, and since 2011, zero, like West Bengal. We're talking about millions of farmers in these states. So you're just making the figure zero and the numbers, so the suicides can go up and the numbers are falling. There have always been huge discrimination in the counting of police. Because police don't go by the census, they go by what the DSP has said. Right? Their manual is different. 90% of women in this country, farmers who commit suicide, are excluded because they are not seen as farmers. There is no land in their name. There is no patta in their name. None of these damn clowns who write about this have ever been to a house where there's a suicide. None of them has been present when the enumerator, when the tahsildar, when the policeman has arrived. For my sins, I've been to 900 of them since 1998. Okay, it's horrible. It's the most demoralizing experience on earth. What happens? The cop comes there. First thing he'll tell the family, patta dikao. Patta dikao. Now your name is not on the patta, you're not a farmer. That rules out all the women on the farms. Do you know the best place in the world to be a woman farmer? Haryana and Punjab. They don't have women farmer suicide because they don't admit that women can be farmers. So you'll find that Haryana and Punjab, the women's suicides categories are blowing up. They're exploding because all the farm girls are going there. Then you have overlaps which nobody can help. I agree. There are overlaps which you and I cannot help. Like a girl, many girls in Andhra, Maharashtra, pulled out of their school and college during the agrarian crisis, commit suicide, it's recorded as a student suicide. Or because their parents are not able to get them married. How do you... So there is an overlap, you can't do anything about that. It's not an easy question to answer. But there are people now writing that the people speaking about farm suicides are ignoring the fact that women and adolescent women suicides are much higher. What a moron. You're trying to compare a gender and an occupation. You're saying that women can't be farmers and farmers can't be women. You're accepting the government's cheapest propaganda levels by doing this. This is a nation that lies to itself, and we had 13 commissions of inquiry of various kinds on farmers' suicides in Maharashtra. I was unfortunately responsible for half of them. Mr. Vilasrao Deshmukh, whose favorite journalist I was, finally appointed one person to give a decisive report. He never visited a farm household. Okay? He never visited a farm household. And he didn't write anything much about farm suicides. He wrote 4 pages dedicated to yours truly. And I woke up to find myself on the front page of Mumbai Mirror as an enemy of the state. My anti-nationalism is limited to the state of Maharashtra. So, Mumbai Mirror on the front page said, Sainath defames state. Okay? I mean, I took that as a badge of honor, of course. But the gentleman who wrote the report was promoted from the obscurity of the vice-chancellor of a second-run university to the planning commission. So this is India, everybody was happy. I wore it as a badge of honor. He got himself a job in the planning commission. Vilas Rao was satisfied that his critic had been tarred and feathered in public. So everybody had this thing. Speaking of farms and enquiries, listen to the notes of the farmers who have committed suicide when you are taking your inquiry. 18 days ago, Gopal Baba Rao Rathod, a 22-year-old, committed suicide in Yavatmal, in Vidarbha. Okay? In village Marwadi. And here he is. One of the things that he's asking you, he says, in cricket teams, in IPL leagues, in volleyball leagues, the children of the rich and the businessmen can play. What about the children of farmers and laborers? A teacher's son or a government officer's son can easily afford the fees of rupees 1 lakh to become an engineer. How will the farmer's son afford that? How will the farmer's children afford that? We can't afford 10,000. When banks are approached for loans, they ask for some property as a mortgage. But what about those who have no property? What will they offer? Salaried individuals get dearness allowance raises without even asking for it, declared by government. We, with our cultivation costs going up every year, what raises do we get? Gopal Baba Rao Rathod. and you know the tehsil from which she came. I'm sorry, speaking to my friend Naik of Sakar. He says, in police stations, an FIR is filed without an inquiry. If asked for, she's saying, implying by what kind of law is that? Unemployed, anyway. And then he says, if you can't bring happiness to others, at least don't bring sorrow. Goodbye, mother. Goodbye, father. Goodbye, brother and sister. I go now. You read the notes. There are dozens of these notes which the police don't allow out. We still get hold of them. Of Rameshwar Lonkar, who wrote. One of the astonishing things about the suicide notes of the farmers, I have not seen this anywhere in the world. They're not addressed to the loved ones, they're not addressed to the family. They're addressed to the finance minister, to the chief minister, to the prime minister, and to the president. Because the farmer is aware that he is the victim of human agency and policy. Their suicide notes tell you that. They address them to the President of India, to Rameshwar Ram, and what's more, they play the game. If you're a small in the struggle for authenticity. So when Ramachandra Rameshwar Rao killed himself, he put a detailed suicide note on a 100 rupee stamped revenue paper. Because he wanted to be taken seriously. Okay? So he got, paper is signed by Upakosh Tehsildar, who never read what the heck went into it. Yeah, it's got the Upakosh Tehsildar stamp on it. We published that in the Hindu. So you have them telling you what the crisis is. And you have people arguing that there is no such thing as an agrarian crisis. On the other hand, I'll come back to the inequality. The Credit Suisse data, analyzed by Oxfam, what did it show you? You know, and if you look at earlier UNDP reports, there used to be, not many years ago, 388 billionaires owning the same wealth as half the world's population in 2010. In 2010, it was 2010, AK, it was the UNDP's figure. $388 billionaires who owned equal to what half the world's population owned. In 2014, that figure fell to 82 individuals, not 388. 82 individuals owned the same as half the population of the world. In 2015, the figure analyzed by Oxfam is 62 individuals, the Warren Buffetts, the Gates, 62 individuals own what half the world's population own. Well, actually, it tells you how little half the world's population own. That's also one way of looking at it. What is the comparable figure for India? I want to acknowledge a young economist working in Delhi in ThoughtWorks, a fellow Telugu, if you like. Since there are non-Narasimha Rao Telugus as well, Srujana Godapatti has calculated using NSS decile-wise data, the Forbes billionaires data, and the Credit Suisse data. 62 individuals in the world own property equal to what half the world has. In India, the 15 richest Indians own more than the bottom 50% of the population. The bottom 50% own 4.1%. The 15 richest Indians own 4.62%. The 100 richest Indians own more wealth, that is 10.02%. The 100 richest Indians own more wealth than the bottom 69% of the population, or 2/3 of your population. The richest Indian, no prizes for guessing who, owns more wealth than the bottom 20% of your population. Okay? How many million people is that on 1.28 billion? 3.8, and in the same country, 38% of the world's stunted live in this country. In 2015, a quarter of the world's hungry live in India. Maybe I have a vision and a hope of an India in 2047 free from hunger and free from enforced hunger caused by the success and affluence of the few leading to the misery of the millions. If we can do that, if we can end that kind of hunger, that will be a very great achievement, and I think we can. We had this, again, as I said, in the United States, the top 1% own 37%, and all economists are agreed that the US, in its present phase, is more unequal than it has ever been in this century, and yet India's is greater, 53% ownership. Compare that with rural India. The socio-economic caste census, what does it tell you? 75% of 17.9 crore rural households, 75% of all rural households, the main breadwinner takes home less than 5,000 rupees. You raise that bar to 10,000, it's 90% of rural families. Just over 8% of rural households has a member earning more than 10,000. If you apply that to Adivasi and Dalit households, that figure falls to about half. 400 million in the last 10 years have never completed or never come out of an educational institution, let alone go into it. 51% of rural households depend on manual casual labor for a living. Over a third of rural India is still illiterate. Salaried houses in scheduled caste households is 7.3%. In scheduled tribe households, 7.4%. And 36% of rural Indians are illiterate. What do? I said the old inequalities are reinforced by the new. The states of Haryana, Punjab and Gujarat Haryana and Rajasthan have passed laws which exclude 80 to 90% of all Dalit women from contesting the post of Sarpanch, from contesting even the Pancha position, the ward member's position, by bringing in educational qualifications as a requirement, which is very interesting. They have graded educational qualifications for higher posts, which makes you wonder how Smriti Irani could ever be HRD minister. The same country runs the most extensive welfare state for the wealthy outside the United States. If you look at your budget statement of revenue foregone, under the heads direct corporate income tax, customs duty exemptions, excise duty waivers, in the last budget, 5,34,000 crores. Since 2007, from when the data is available, we have written off 42.3 trillion rupees. Okay, with just what we have written off on gold, diamonds, and jewelry, which is 73,000 crores in the current budget. In 8 years, we could provide. For 8 years, we could provide on that amount. I'm talking about since 2007. The total amount written off on gold, diamonds, and jewelry, which comes to about 1.6 lakh crore. It comes to several lakh crores, much more than that. Your universal health care for 10 years would cost 1.6 lakh crores according to a government's estimate. Now, every hungry Indian could be provided food grain for the next 50 years on that 42.3 trillion rupees. Okay? And here we are celebrating inequality, and most shamefully, when Thomas Piketty was there on NDTV a few months ago, discussing with him were two learned economists. One, Mr. De Broglie, and the other, the Chief Economic Advisor to Government of India. Both did not think inequality was an issue, and in fact went on record to say, if people make pots of money and flaunt it, that's their business, none of my business. Okay? None of my business. And the Chief Economic Advisor said, I agree with Vivek on that one. Flaunting, it's not an issue. I'm not going to comment on flaunting. I agree with Vivek on that one. You know how much you've changed, how much your universe has changed. In the 80s or even in the late 90s, if a chief economic advisor had said this, he'd be studying the employment columns tomorrow. Okay? He would be. Right? I mean, what sort of disgusting attitudes have we developed? That selfishness, that bragadical, the sheer heartlessness of it, and making a virtue of it. And come lastly to the media. The media always come last. We need a new vision of media. You know, there was a vision for media. It wasn't spelled out for media at all. Gandhi meant something else entirely. But I have always thought, I always used to think, that Gandhi's talisman was a brilliant fit for journalism, especially for Indian journalism and its wonderful traditions of 180 years. There were many beautiful things in Indian journalism, wonderful things in Indian journalism. Please guys, those of you who are in that age group, the larger part of Indian journalistic history is very distinguished. It's not the Bombay Times. Okay? There was some, once upon a time there were journalists, Sukumar. Now we have content generators. Once upon a time there were readers and viewers and audiences. Now we count clicks. Yeah? Now we count clicks and hits. People don't happen. Journalists are content producers and content. I'm not a content generator, I'm a bloody journalist, okay? I'm a reporter. I like being that. I don't want to be a clickbait. So, anyway, Gandhi said, for society as a whole, for those who had self-doubt, well, the present generation of leaders and policymakers don't have an iota of self-doubt. But, they've never heard of it. But recall the face of the poorest and weakest man you have seen in your, and ask yourself if the step you contemplate is going to be of any use to him. Will he gain anything by it? Will it restore to him a control over his own life and destiny? You know the rest of it, and it says, then you will find your doubts and yourself melt away. Actually, the best thing I heard about update I heard of this was, I don't know if he'll deny it now, but Mani Shankar Iyer sitting in the audience next to me was reciting it as, recall the face of the richest Ambani you have met, and ends it with, and then all your, then you will find your public resources and wealth melt away. Something worse to that effect. Mani Shankar, he was making this quote at a meeting where I was. I don't know if he will, I think he will own up to it for sure. Now in 2017, if we're talking about the vision for the future, what about the media in the present? Is it unreasonable for me to ask of the media in 2017? Is it unreasonable to ask that the media practiced something, strange as it is, something called journalism, and do so with something approaching near human intelligence and sensitivity? We all agree that media don't cover rural India. Here's news for you. They don't cover urban India either. The Center for Media Studies data in Delhi show us all India coverage on the front page of 6 major newspapers. 66% is New Delhi, and one part of New Delhi is Mumbai gets more than Chennai and Kolkata together because we have Bollywood and Dalal Street. Chennai and Bangalore get something slightly here and there because they have IT. The dozens of cities that have more than 1 million population, none of these matter really. The good part is, I think we can ask, because there are many new initiatives, many groups of people trying to do things differently, but there is an uphill struggle. Okay? But they're trying to do it. Yet, I want to say this, that look at how debased journalism has become in the last decade. in the last decade or two, all the great stories of journalism have come from non-professional journalists. They've come from WikiLeaks. They've come from Edward Snowden. Right? Some of the greatest stories that have shook the world have come from outside the mainstream media, and certainly outside the corporate media. Of course, there are exceptions and all those. I'll assume that you have accepted all those disclaimers from me. But we've accepted that the media are a business. Here's your tragedy. We live in the most diverse country in the world. We live in the most heterogeneous, most diverse, most uniquely complex societies or collection of societies in the world. And you are trying to keep yourself informed on that by a media that is ever more homogeneous, ever narrower in its control, ever narrower in its ownership and vision. It's impossible. Such a complex, heterogeneous society cannot be covered by such a concentrated, homogeneous media. You cannot do it. Right? So, and if you look, the country breaks up into 95 regions. I've done that for the initiative of which I am part. It's called People's Archive of Rural India. I invite you to visit the site. It's a free site. No payment gateway for you to enter. Nothing. It's called Rural India Online, one word, .org. ruralindiaonline.org. We divide the country into 95 regions, and we find, looking at the CMS data, that no major channel or newspaper covers 8 or 10 of these regions properly, in any significant way. Because the media we are in are driven by revenue, not by reality. They're driven by commerce, not by community. By profit, not by people. By narrow corporate need, not by news judgment. So here's the vision for the media. One, I think, by the way, to even think of that vision, there's got to be very serious legislation against concentration and monopoly, and for legislation for promoting diversity in the media. That has got to happen. But here's my thing. I want you to know this, especially a younger generation sitting here. Journalism, art, literature, these did not come out of corporate investments. They came out of communities and societies. My vision is that we return them to communities and people. That is possible, it's achievable. It can be done. So, in summary, what is that vision? What can we ask for? What can we look for in 2047? An India where all work is decent work, and a country free of degrading and dehumanizing occupations like those of manual scavenging. An India where Dalits will have decisively won what I believe is the greatest battle on earth for human dignity. That first human right to be recognized as human. An India free of arbitrary and authoritarian power and of the arrogance of arbitrary power. An India where every child is in school and where not where as we are now, where 400 million have never been to school. An India where, as our constitution demands, childhood and youth are guaranteed protection against exploitation and against material and moral abandonment. Please look at the directive principles of state policy in your constitution, but also please look at the most neglected and blacked out clauses of the Universal Human Rights Declaration. Clauses 23 to 26, which speak of the right to a decent wage, the right to decent employment, the right to organize, the right to collective bargaining. Right? All those rights are there in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Some of them are reflected in your directive principles of state policy. There is an overlap. But please look at rights 23 to 27. I want also an India free of the kind of techno-fix illusions that we live in. like this idiocy of integrating and linking 37 rivers by clowns who have no concept of what nature is about and what rivers are about, what water is about. Understand, I was hearing one of them the other day. Millions and billions of liters are flowing into the sea of fresh water, waste. You know what, if that water did not flow into the seas, you would not have a monsoon. It's a very serious factor in the creation and building of a monsoon. It is one of those factors. You can draw on it, that's another matter. But the idea that somehow rivers flowing into seas is a criminal waste, it's a peculiarly Indian elite stupidity. If there was an Olympics for insanity, this would win the gold medal. India envisioned in the directive principles of state policy where, and this is critical, the operation of the economic system does not result in the concentration of wealth and means of production to the common detriment, that the ownership and control of material resources, are actually so distributed that they do not lead to the detriment of the greater majority. And India, free of gross and grotesque inequality, Ambedkar, in November 25th, 1949, made that moving speech on inequality. Today we enter an era of contradictions, where we have equality in politics, but inequality in society and economy. One day the contradiction between the two will implode our democracy. Truer words were never spoken, and we are at that crossroads today. An India free of communal and sectarian prejudice, hatred, and violence, where the secular ideal actually also reflects in the firm and complete separation of state and religion. I was in Telangana last week. What? Godavari Pushkar, Krishna Pushkar, chief ministers taking the first dip and spending 2,000 crores of public money. This hideously, grotesquely whipped up religiosity, not religion, but religiosity that is whipped up. I hope we have an India free of that. An India where land, water, and forest are owned by people, by communities, and societies with full regard and respect for all the creatures and species that share those resources with us. And that share with us, not to be run on the basis that technology can solve every problem. An India where law and justice are inextricably linked, where the operation of the one must lead to the achievement of the other. Okay? Apart from Ambedkar, and many, well over a century, I don't know how many decades apart, over and above a century, Victor Hugo wrote, "There is no force on earth mightier than an idea whose time has come." And I believe that time has come. In 2017, try to make it come right by 2047, and the idea is social, political, economic, cultural, and gender justice. Thank you.